The first sign of trouble arrived at precisely 6:42 in the morning. I know the time because I was standing at my kitchen window, watching the digital clock on the microwave flip over while I waited for the coffee to finish its cycle. It was a Tuesday in early October, the air holding that crisp, clean edge that promises a cool day. Steam fogged the lower pane of the window, and through it I saw her. Carol Peterson. She was standing on my lawn, right next to the low, decorative retaining wall that separated my property from the HOA's common area slope. In her hands, she held a sledgehammer. She was not a large woman, but she held it with a kind of righteous authority, as if it were a scepter, and she was queen of all she surveyed. Which, in a way, she was. Or at least she thought she was. I took a slow sip of my coffee. The heat, a welcome sensation. I didn't move from the window. I simply watched. She planted her feet, took a practice swing that was more awkward than menacing, and then brought the hammer down on the top course of the stonework. It was a glancing blow, chipping a corner off one of the capstones and sending a puff of granite dust into the morning air. The sound was sharp, a percussive crack that cut through the quiet hum of the neighborhood waking up. She grunted with the effort. A sound of profound frustration, as if the wall had personally offended her. I continued to watch. I didn't rush out. I didn't yell. My heart rate didn't even quicken. It was, I reflected, much like observing a stress test on a concrete cylinder in the lab. You apply pressure. You watch for the first signs of fracture. You document the failure point. This was just a different kind of material science. She swung again, this time with more force, connecting squarely. A larger piece of the capstone broke away and tumbled onto the grass on my side. She was making progress. Finally, I pushed the button on my phone to start the video recording, set it on the windowsill where it had a clear view, and walked to the back door. I slid it open quietly and stepped out onto my patio. The air was cold on my bare arms. Carol was so focused on her act of municipal vandalism that she didn't hear me. She was muttering to herself, words I couldn't quite make out. Something about compliance and violations. I cleared my throat, not loudly, just enough. She spun around, startled, the sledgehammer held halfway through another backswing. For a moment, she looked like a startled animal. Then, the mask of the HOA president slammed back into place. Her face hardened, a mixture of condescension and aggression. "Arthur," she said, her voice tight. "It's about time you came out. I'm removing this illegal structure. You've had your final notice." I took another sip of coffee. "There was no final notice, Carol," I said, my voice even. "There was a letter from you, which I have. It wasn't a legal notice." She scoffed, a short barking sound. "It's from the Architectural Review Committee." "Was. It's as legal as it gets in this neighborhood. This wall is an unapproved modification on common property. It's coming down today. I've got a crew coming at 8. I glanced at the wall, then back at her. "The wall is not on common property. It is entirely within my property line. And you're not the Architectural Review Committee. You're just you, with a sledgehammer, committing felony destruction of property." I let that hang in the air for a moment. I find that using precise language can be very effective. Her face flushed a deep, angry red. "I am the president of this homeowners association. I represent the board. This is common area, and this ugly wall is a liability. You will be billed for the cost of removal and for the fines you've accrued, which are now, let's see," she paused for dramatic effect, "over $5,000. If you don't pay, we will place a lien on your house. Now go back inside before I call the sheriff. And have you cited for harassment?" I didn't move. I just looked at her, at the sledgehammer, at the damage she had already done. I looked up the slope, past the wall, to the edge of her own pristine asphalt driveway, which sat about 5 feet higher than my lawn. I looked at the fine network of hairline cracks that I knew, but she didn't. Were beginning to form near the edge of that driveway. She was performing, as she always did, for an invisible audience of imagined supporters. She was confident, powerful, and absolutely, unequivocally wrong. She had no idea. She had no idea. She had just personally signed the demolition permit for her own driveway. But before I tell you what I did next, I should probably explain a few things. Context is important. My name is Arthur Pendleton. I am 72 years old, and for 45 of those years I was a licensed professional engineer. Specifically, a civil engineer with a specialization in geotechnical and structural design. For the last 20 years of my career, I ran my own consulting firm. We worked on everything from deep foundations for high-rises to soil stability analysis for mountain highways. My entire life, my entire career, was built on a foundation of physics, mathematics, and the absolute, unyielding importance of documentation. You don't guess where bedrock is. You drill borings and you produce a report. You don't assume a beam can carry a load. You run the calculations, you check them, and then you have another engineer check them again. On paper, everything had to be perfect before a single shovel of dirt was moved. It was a mindset that had served me well. It also made me, by nature, a very patient man. My wife, Eleanor, passed away 6 years ago. We bought this property together 30 years back. It was the last undeveloped lot in the subdivision, and it was cheap for a reason. It was on a hillside, with a significant slope at the back. Eleanor was a landscape architect, and I was, well, me. We saw the challenge not as a flaw, but as an opportunity. We designed the house ourselves, a modest single-story structure terraced into the hill. We spent months on the plans. I did the grading plan, the foundation design, the structural calculations. She designed the gardens, the walkways, the way the house would integrate with the landscape. It was our project, our shared creation. This house is more than just wood and concrete to me. It's the last, most tangible thing we built together. It is a living blueprint of our marriage. The slope was the biggest issue. The upper part of the lot, adjacent to what was then an undeveloped common area, was prone to erosion. The soil was a mix of clay and sand, unstable when saturated. After the first winter, I noticed soil sloughing off the slope and piling up against the foundation of my workshop at the back of the property. I did what I always do. I got to work. I took soil samples. I ran percolation tests. I drew up a set of plans for a gravity retaining wall, designed to stabilize the entire slope. It was a simple, elegant, designator-clocking blocks of split-face granite with a proper footing, integrated drainage, and geogrid reinforcement extending back into the hillside. It was, if I do say so myself, a textbook perfect example of residential earth retention. It was also, by design, located 3 full feet inside my property line to give me a permanent access and maintenance buffer. I filed the plans with the county, paid for the permit, had the inspections done at every stage, and received the final certificate of occupancy for the structure. The original HOA board, a far more reasonable group of people, sent me a letter thanking me for solving the erosion problem at my own expense, as it also protected the common area above. I kept that letter. Of course, I kept it. Carol Peterson and her husband moved in about 4 years ago, into the house at the top of the slope. The common area behind my wall was a narrow strip of land, maybe 15 feet wide, that separated our properties. A year after moving in, Carol got herself elected to the HOA board, and 6 months after that, she was the president. Her campaign was based on a platform of restoring property values, and enforcing the covenants. What that meant in practice was a reign of petty terror, conducted via email, and violation notices printed on hot pink paper. She fined old Mr. Henderson for having a garden gnome she deemed tacky. She tried to force the Miller family to repaint their front door because it was, in her words, a shade of beige inconsistent with the approved community palette. She was a tyrant of trivialities. Her first notice to me arrived 2 years ago. It stated that my wall was an unapproved structure and must be removed. I responded with a polite letter, enclosing a copy of the original building permit from the county and a copy of the letter of thanks from the previous HOA board. I thought that would be the end of it. It was all there, on paper. How could there be an argument? I underestimated her. Her response was that the previous board had no authority to approve such a structure and that county permits were irrelevant to HOA rules. It was a stunning piece of illogic, but it was her position. She had no idea how retaining walls worked, what permits meant, or where the property lines were. She only knew that she didn't like the look of my wall and, as president, she believed her aesthetic judgment was law. This was when I started the folder. It was a simple manila folder, but it became my repository of reason. Into it went every piece of correspondence, her pink notices, my certified letters in response. But I started paying the absurd fines she sent May $25 for weeds visible in planting beds, $50 for my garbage can being left out 3 hours too long. I didn't argue. I just paid them by check, and when the canceled check came back, I stapled it to a copy of the violation notice and placed it in the folder. A canceled check is a form of contract. It is an acknowledgement of a transaction. On paper, it showed a pattern of compliance on my part and a pattern of escalating harassment on hers. I kept the receipts. I documented everything. When she had the common area landscaped, I noted that her contractor's bobcat repeatedly bumped against my wall. When she and her husband had their driveway widened, I took photos showing the new asphalt was poured right up to, and in some places over, the soil directly supported by my wall. Sawis? It was an unpermitted extension, I later learned, but at the time it was just another photograph for the folder. The folder grew thicker. It was my silent, methodical partner in this slow-motion conflict. It was my answer to her emotional, baseless assertions. She had her feelings and her perceived authority. I had paper, I had physics, and I was content to wait. Until, that is, the morning she appeared with a sledgehammer. After her tirade on my lawn, after she threatened me with liens and the sheriff, I just gave her a small, tight smile. "Carol," I said, holding my coffee cup steady, "you need to stop. You are on my property, you are destroying my property, and you are making a very, very serious mistake." "The only mistake," she shot back, her voice rising, "was the board ever letting you get away with this. The crew will be here at 8. They will finish what I've started. You can either cooperate or you can explain it to the deputies." She threw the sledgehammer down on the grass, a gesture of finality, and stomped back up the slope, disappearing around the side of her house. I stood there for a long moment. I looked at the chipped capstones. I looked at the sledgehammer lying on my lawn like a piece of primitive sculpture. The video on my phone was still recording. I walked over, picked up the hammer, and carried it into my workshop. It was evidence. Then I went back inside, poured myself another cup of coffee, and sat down at my desk. The folder was on the corner, a 1/4 inch thick. It was time to get to work. It was time to move from passive documentation to active preparation. My first call was not to a lawyer. It was to Frank Gable. Frank was the best surveyor I had ever worked with. We had known each other for 30 years. He was semi-retired, but he still kept his license active for interesting jobs. I considered this an interesting job. I described the situation, the wall, the sledgehammer, the threats. He just chuckled, a dry, raspy sound. "Artie," he said, "sounds like you've got yourself a classic boundary lines zealot. They're the worst kind. They operate on pure belief." "I need you to do a new survey, Frank," I said. "I want it staked. I want an ALTA survey, showing all improvements, easements, and encumbrances. I want it signed, sealed, and delivered yesterday." "You've already got the original plat map," he said. "It's a legal document." "I know," I replied. "But a 30-year-old plat map is an abstraction. I want physical stakes in the ground. I want something her demolition crew can see and will have to consciously ignore. And I want to check for any new easements or changes recorded since I built." He agreed. Of course, he said he could be there the next morning. My second action was to compose a formal letter. Not to Carol, but to the HOA, addressed to the board of directors, care of their registered agent, which was a management company downtown. This was a crucial step. By communicating with the board through their official agent, I was creating a formal legal record that bypassed Carol's personal control. The letter was simple and direct. It stated the facts. The wall was a permitted structure located entirely on my property. It referenced the attached documents: a copy of my deed, the original plat map, the county building permit, and the final inspection report. It then stated, in no uncertain terms, that the wall was a critical retaining structure supporting the slope on the adjacent common area, and that its removal would likely lead to catastrophic slope failure, subsidence, and significant damage to HOA common property and adjacent private property, namely, Carol Peterson's driveway. I included several high-resolution photographs of the damage Carol had already inflicted with the sledgehammer. Finally, the letter concluded with a formal cease and desist demand. It warned that if the HOA or its agents, including its president, took any further action to damage or remove the wall, I would hold the association and its board members, jointly and severally, liable for all resulting damages, including the cost of repair, engineering fees, and legal costs. I had a paralegal friend of mine, Maria, review it. She was the one who suggested adding the jointly and severally language. It was a nice touch. It makes board members personally nervous. I sent the letter via certified mail with return receipt requested, and I also emailed a PDF copy to the management company's general inbox with a read receipt enabled. On paper, they were now officially on notice. Their ignorance was no longer a plausible defense. The read receipt from the email came back within an hour. The signed certified mail card would take a couple of days. I knew Carol would likely intercept the physical mail at the management company. But the email was a digital breadcrumb that couldn't be erased. She could claim she never saw the letter, but the management company's server logs would say otherwise. I kept the receipts, digital and physical. As expected, her demolition crew, 2 men in a battered pickup truck, with a magnetic sign for affordable landscaping on the door, arrived just after 8 o'clock. I was waiting for them. I met them at the bottom of my driveway. I was polite. I introduced myself and explained that the wall they had been hired to demolish was on private property and was a critical safety structure. I showed them a copy of my deed and the plat map. The older of the 2 men, who seemed to be the boss, looked at the papers, then looked at the wall, then back at me. He was clearly uncomfortable. "Lady said it was HOA land," he mumbled. "I understand what she may have told you," I said calmly. "But these are the legal documents. If you proceed, you will be trespassing and destroying private property. I don't want to have to call the sheriff, but I will. More importantly, your company will be liable for the damages. I just wanted to make you aware of the situation before you started." Carol chose that moment to march down her driveway. "What's going on here?" she demanded. "You come pass. Why aren't you working?" The contractor looked from her to me, a deep frown on his face. "Ma'am, this gentleman is saying this is his property. He's got a deed here." Carol waved her hand dismissively, as if swatting away a fly. "It's a fake. He's a crazy old man. I am the president of the HOA. I am telling you to tear down that wall. If you don't, you won't be paid, and I'll make sure your company never gets another contract in this entire county." It was a classic overplay. The threat was too big, too cartoonishly villainous. The contractor's face hardened. He was a small businessman, and he didn't like being threatened. He looked at me, then at her. He handed the papers back to me. "Sorry, ma'am," he said to Carol. "This is a legal dispute. We're not getting in the middle of it. You need to sort this out with him first." He and his partner got back in their truck and drove away. The look on Carol's face was a mixture of pure fury and utter disbelief. She had been defied. Her authority, which she believed to be absolute, had been questioned and found wanting by a simple landscaper. She turned her glare on me. "But ah, Sentenbur, you will regret this, Arthur. This is not over." She stormed back to her house. I knew she was right. It wasn't over. But she had no idea that she had just lost the first crucial battle, and I now had 2 more witnesses. The next morning, Frank arrived as promised. He worked for 3 hours, his movements precise and economical. He set up his total station, took his readings, and drove rebar stakes with bright orange plastic caps into the ground, one at each corner of my property, and, most importantly, one every 10 feet along the property line between my lot and the HOA common area. The line of orange caps ran a clean 3 feet away from the base of my wall, leaving the entire structure, its footing, and a generous buffer zone squarely on my side. It was a beautiful, undeniable, physical fact hammered into the earth. While he was packing up, Frank handed me a file. "You were right to have me check the records, Artie," he said, tapping the folder. "Found something interesting." I opened it. Inside was a copy of a document filed with the county recorder's office 15 years ago, 5 years after I built my wall. It was a lot line adjustment and easement agreement between the original developer and the county. The developer, in order to get final approval for the last phase of the subdivision, had been required to make some minor adjustments to the common area boundaries to accommodate a new sewer line. As part of that adjustment, a new plat map was recorded. And on that map there was a new note. Frank pointed to it. "There. It grants a 10-foot slope, support and maintenance easement to your property, Lot 22, extending into the HOA common area, Lot C. The legal description starts from your shared property line and goes 10 feet up the hill." He grinned. "Whatever that slope is doing, you have a recorded legal right to make sure it keeps doing it. It means you have the right to access that land, to maintain the structural integrity of the slope. Your wall is the primary instrument of that integrity." This was more than I could have hoped for. This was the bombshell. Not only was the wall on my property, but I had a recorded easement on her side of the line, specifically for the purpose of supporting the slope. The very land her unpermitted driveway extension was sitting on was encumbered by an easement in my favor. She had no idea. On paper, my rights were now even more deeply entrenched than I had realized. "But there's more," Frank said, his eyes twinkling. He pulled out another document. It was a copy of the permit application for Carol's house, filed 4 years ago. It showed the original driveway plans. Well, then he showed me an aerial photograph from the county's GIS website, dated 6 months ago. It clearly showed the driveway as it was now 5 feet wider than the permitted plans, extending right to the edge of the steep drop-off above my wall. "She widened it without a permit," I said. "No permit on file with the county," Frank confirmed. which means it was never inspected, an asphalt driveway that close to the top of a two-tone slope with no engineered retaining structure on her side. No inspector would have ever signed off on that. It's a code violation. A big one. The pieces were all clicking into place. My legally permitted wall was not just holding up the slope. It was the only thing holding up her illegal driveway extension. Her obsessive quest to destroy my wall was, in fact, a campaign to destroy her own property. The irony was so dense, it was almost poetic. I thanked Frank, paid him for his excellent work, and placed the new documents carefully into my folder. The folder was now nearly an inch thick. It was no longer just a defensive tool. It was becoming a weapon. The next move from Carol was predictable. 2 days later, a sheriff's deputy was at my door. She had called them. I saw his patrol car pull up, and I was ready. I invited him in, offered him a coffee, which he politely declined, and we sat at my kitchen table. Deputy Miller was young, professional, and had the weary look of someone who had already dealt with too many neighborhood disputes. He explained the situation. Mr. Pendleton, I've just come from speaking with a Ms. Carol Peterson. She alleges that you have constructed a wall on HOA property and that you threatened a work crew she hired. She's claiming harassment and trespassing. I nodded slowly. I see. And what did you tell her? I told her it sounds like a civil matter, he said, but she was very insistent that a report be filed. She said she wants to press charges. So I need to get your side of the story for the record. This was the moment. This was the performance. But my performance was one of quiet, documented fact. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't get emotional. I simply opened my folder on the table. Deputy, I began. I'd like to state, for the record, and I see your body camera is on, which is good. My name is Arthur Pendleton. I am the legal owner of this property, 121 Arbor Lane. This is a copy of my grant deed. I pushed the paper across the table. This is a copy of a new survey of my property, completed and staked 2 days ago by a licensed surveyor. I pushed another paper across. As you can see from the survey, the wall in question is located entirely within my property boundaries. The orange stakes are still in the ground outside if you'd like to see them. He picked up the survey and looked at it, his eyes tracing the lines. He was clearly impressed by the professionalism of the document. I continued. The wall is not a decorative fence. It is an engineered retaining structure. This is the original building permit issued by the county. Another sheet of paper. And this is the certificate of final inspection and occupancy for the structure. Another sheet. The wall is necessary to support the slope that rises from my property to the HOA common land. In fact, my property possesses a recorded slope support and maintenance easement on the HOA's land for this very purpose. This is a copy of the recorded easement. The bombshell document landed on the pile. The deputy looked at the easement, then back at me. A flicker of understanding, and perhaps even sympathy, crossed his face. So you're saying the wall is not only legal and on your land, but it's actually doing the HOA a favor. It's preventing a landslide, deputy, I said simply. As for the work crew, I did not threaten them. I informed them of the legal status of the property and of their potential liability. They made a professional decision not to proceed. I have their company's name and the names they gave me if you need them for your report. He was silent for a moment, looking at the stack of documents. He had come here expecting a, he said, she said, argument between two stubborn neighbors. He had walked into a meticulously prepared, legal case. He had Carol's emotional, unsubstantiated claims on one side, and my calm, documented, verifiable facts on the other. Mr. Pendleton, he said finally, a subtle shift in his tone, you seem to have all your ducks in a row. I believe in being prepared, I said. I would also like to file a report of my own for destruction of property. Ms. Peterson came onto my land 2 days ago with a sledgehammer and damaged the wall. I have a time-stamped video of the incident from my kitchen window. His eyebrows went up. You have video? I do, and I have the sledgehammer, which she left on my lawn. I've stored it in my workshop. I would appreciate it if you would list all of these documents I've shown you in your report by their official titles. On paper, I want the record to be perfectly clear. He nodded, a small, almost imperceptible smile touching his lips. I understand completely, sir. I will make a very detailed report. He spent another 20 minutes, meticulously documenting everything. He took my statement. He went outside to look at the damage and the survey stakes. When he left, I knew I had successfully transformed a police response from a threat against me into a key piece of evidence in my favor. The official police report, with its neutral third-party observations, would become another important chapter in my folder. Carol, in her arrogance, had called the authorities to enforce her will. Instead, she had only succeeded in getting her own illegal actions officially documented. She had no idea how badly she had just miscalculated. The day after the deputy's visit, something shifted in the neighborhood. The story of the standoff with the landscapers, and then the sheriff's visit, must have spread. That afternoon, as I was sweeping leaves from my driveway, Mr. Henderson, from across the street, came over. He was a small, timid man in his 80s who had lived here longer than anyone. Carol had been fining him for years over the state of his prize-winning roses, claiming they weren't a uniform planting. He looked around nervously before speaking. "Arthur," he whispered, "I heard what happened. Is it true you made her back down?" "I just showed them the facts, George," I said. He wrung his hands. "She's a bully. She's been bullying all of us for years, but nobody wants to fight her. It's too expensive. Too much trouble. We just pay the fines." He took a deep breath. "But what you're doing, it's brave. I want to help." He pulled a small digital audio recorder from his pocket. "I've been recording the HOA meetings for the last year, the official minutes she types up. They leave a lot out. I have a recording from 6 months ago where you were discussed. The board's lawyer, Mr. Davies, was there. He told her flat out that your wall was a non-issue, that it was permitted and on your property, and that pursuing it would be a fiduciary risk to the HOA. She told him he was being overly cautious and that the board was moving forward anyway. I felt a surge of adrenaline, the kind you get when a crucial piece of data confirms your hypothesis. This was it. This was the smoking gun. The board had been given correct legal advice, and Carol had not only ignored it, she had actively defied it. This took it beyond mere negligence. This was willful misconduct. "George," I said, my voice low, "you have no idea how important that is. Are you willing to provide me with a copy of that recording?" He nodded, his eyes determined. "I'll do more than that. If it comes to it, I'll testify." He was the fearful ally, no longer fearful. Why? My quiet resistance had given him the courage to step forward. 2 days later, I received an email from a name I barely recognized. It was Sarah Jenkins, one of the 2 other members of the HOA board. The disillusioned insider. Her email was brief. "Mr. Pendleton, I cannot condone the president's actions. They were taken without a formal board vote. I am prepared to state as much. I believe an emergency meeting is in order. I now had a coalition." It was me, the quiet professional with the paper trail. George, the community conscience with the secret recordings, and Sarah, the insider, ready to break ranks. We were no longer just a collection of aggrieved individuals. We were becoming an organized opposition. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place that Friday night. I had installed a small motion-activated wildlife camera in the shrubs opposite the wall after the sledgehammer incident. It was cellular, uploading its footage directly to the cloud. At 2:17 in the morning, my phone buzzed with an alert. I opened the live feed. The video was grainy, shot in infrared, but the image was perfectly clear. It was Carol. And she wasn't alone. She was with her husband and another man I didn't recognize. They had pry bars and pickaxes. I didn't call the police, I just watched, and the camera recorded. I watched as they systematically, and with a great deal of effort, pulled down a 20-foot section of my wall. Stones tumbled onto my lawn. They worked with a kind of frantic, destructive energy. As they pulled one of the last base stones out, I saw it on the video, a small river of damp soil and gravel spilling out from behind where the wall had been. Then a dark line appeared on the ground just behind them. It snaked its way up the slope. It was a fissure. A crack was opening in the earth. I zoomed in the camera. The crack ran all the way up the slope and ended directly underneath the edge of her illegal driveway extension. She had done it. In her final desperate escalation, she had personally executed the demolition of her own property's support system. The camera recorded for a full 15 minutes, until they seemed satisfied with the destruction and scurried away into the darkness. I saved the video file. I backed it up to 2 different hard drives and another cloud service. I typed up a brief affidavit detailing what I had observed. The folder was now complete. All the evidence was in place. The trap was set. All I had to do now was let her walk into it. The emergency HOA meeting was scheduled for the following Wednesday night, called by Sarah and the other board member over Carol's strenuous objections. The clubhouse meeting room was packed. I had never seen so many residents at an HOA meeting. Word had clearly gotten out that something significant was about to happen. Carol's supporters, a small clique of residents who enjoyed the power she wielded on their behalf, were clustered in the front rows. Everyone else was arrayed behind them, a silent, expectant sea of faces. I sat in the back with George Henderson, my lawyer, Mr. Davier, the same one Carol had ignored. Now hired by me, sat in the front row, a thick briefcase on his lap. The meeting began with Carol trying to control the narrative. She took the podium and immediately launched into a prepared speech. It was a masterclass in performative victimhood. Her voice trembled as she spoke of her dedication to the community, her tireless efforts to maintain property values. She painted me as a rogue homeowner, a wealthy recluse who thought the rules didn't apply to him. This man, she said, pointing a shaking finger in my direction, built an enormous, hideous wall on your common property. He has refused all good faith efforts to resolve this. He has been arrogant and dismissive. When we were forced to begin the removal of this illegal structure, he threatened our contractors and harassed me, his neighbor, and your president. He is trying to intimidate your board and subvert the will of the community. There were murmurs of support from her section. She was good. I had to give her that. She could sell a narrative. She then held up a piece of paper. This is a report from a certified structural engineer, confirming that the wall serves no structural purpose and that its removal is recommended for the beautification of our shared space. I glanced at Mr. Davies. He gave me a nearly imperceptible nod. We had already looked up the engineer she had hired. He ran a home inspection business and had his engineering license suspended in 2 neighboring states. His report wasn't worth the paper it was printed on. When she finished, there was scattered applause. She smiled, confident and triumphant, and then recognized Sarah Jenkins. Sarah stood up. "Carol," she said, her voice clear and steady, "the board did not vote to remove that wall. In fact, the board was advised by legal counsel weeks ago that Mr. Pendleton's wall was not an HOA issue. You acted unilaterally against legal advice." The room went quiet. Carol's smile faltered. "That's a mischaracterization of the legal advice," she stammered. "Is it?" Mr. Davies stood up. Carol Peterson. My name is Alan Davies. 6 weeks ago, in my capacity as legal counsel for the HOA, did I not advise you in the presence of the full board that Arthur Pendleton's wall was a legally permitted structure on his private property, and that any attempt by the HOA to remove it would result in significant legal and financial liability for the association? Carol stared at him, her face paling. That was your opinion. It was my legal advice which the HOA pays for, he countered. Advice which I have on tape, you chose to ignore. He gestured to George, who held up his small recorder. The color drained completely from Carol's face. She had no idea George had been recording. The mask was beginning to crack. Then Mr. Davies turned to the assembled homeowners. My client, Mr. Pendleton, has tried to resolve this amicably for 2 years. He has been met with nothing but harassment and baseless fines. In response to the association's escalating threats, he commissioned a new survey. He pulled a large, rolled-up document from his briefcase and unfurled it, pinning it to a corkboard. It was Frank's survey, blown up to poster size. The property line, the wall, the easemented, was all there in stark, undeniable black and white. As you can see, the wall is, and always has been, on my client's property. He let that sink in. Then he continued, his voice calm and methodical. Furthermore, the wall serves a vital purpose. It retains the slope upon which part of the HOA common area and the president's own driveway rests. A driveway, I might add, that was extended without a county permit, in violation of building codes. He placed a new set of documents on the table in front of the board. These are the county records. A wave of murmurs swept through the room. People were turning to look at Carol, their expressions shifting from support to confusion and then to anger. They were homeowners. They understood permits. They understood liability. Carol was stammering now, trying to regain control. This is a lie. He's twisting things. The wall was damaged by the recent rains. That's why it had to be removed. It was a safety hazard. Mr. Davies looked at her. His expression, one of pity. The recent rains, that's your position? You are stating, in front of this entire community, that you had no personal involvement in the damage done to Mr. Pendleton's wall last Friday night. Absolutely not, she said, her voice shrill with indignation. That's a slanderous accusation, I see. Mr. Davies said softly. He turned and nodded to me. I took out my phone, connected it to the clubhouse's projector, and pressed play. The room went dark, and the grainy black and white infrared video filled the screen on the wall. There was no sound, but none was needed. The images were damning. Carol, her husband, the other man, the pickaxes and pry bars, the stones being pulled away, the fissure opening in the ground. The video played for a full minute in dead silence. When the lights came up, every single person in the room was staring at Carol Peterson. Her face was a blank slate. The confident, aggressive mask was gone, shattered into 1,000 pieces. The performative tyrant had been stripped bare by the simple, irrefutable light of a hidden camera. She stood there, exposed and utterly defeated. Not by an emotional argument, but by a calm, methodical presentation of documented fact. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She had no idea. All this time, she thought she was fighting a stubborn old man. She was, in fact, fighting a camera, a surveyor's transit, a file folder, and the unyielding laws of physics. And she had lost. On paper, on video. The collapse was swift and total. In the stunned silence that followed the video presentation, Sarah Jenkins formally made a motion to remove Carol Peterson as president of the HOA, effective immediately. The other board members seconded it. The vote was nearly unanimous. She was stripped of her title right there in front of the entire community she had lorded over. She didn't say a word. She just grabbed her purse and practically fled the room, her husband scurrying behind her. The meeting concluded with the board voting to hire Mr. Davies to represent the HOA in the coming legal proceedings, and to immediately engage an engineering firm to assess the damage to the slope. The verdict, when it came, was not a single event, but a series of them, a cascade of consequences she had set in motion. First, the legal fallout. I filed a civil suit against Carol personally and against the HOA. The HOA's insurance carrier, upon seeing our evidence, especially the audio recording of her ignoring their own lawyer's advice, settled with us. Almost immediately, they paid for the complete reconstruction of my wall to a higher standard than before. They paid for Mr. Davies' legal fees. They paid a significant sum for damages. And then they promptly dropped the HOA's policy, forcing the new board to find new, much more expensive insurance. As part of the settlement, the HOA was required to send a formal letter of apology to every homeowner Carol had improperly fined, and to refund all the money. My folder of canceled checks for her petty fines made that calculation very easy. My suit against Carol personally was for the damages that exceeded the HOA's liability, specifically for her willful and malicious actions. The video was the centerpiece of that case. Her lawyer advised her to settle. Her homeowner's insurance refused to cover it as it was an intentional act. She had to pay out of pocket. It was a substantial amount. On top of that, the district attorney, prompted by the sheriff's report and our video evidence, charged her with felony destruction of property. She eventually pleaded down to a misdemeanor and was sentenced to probation and a hefty fine. On paper, she now had a criminal record. Then came the driveway. The engineering firm hired by the new board confirmed everything my own analysis had shown. My wall had been the sole support for the improperly compacted fill dirt under her unpermitted driveway extension. With a section of the wall removed, the slope had begun a process of deep rotational failure. The county inspector, alerted by the engineers, came out and red-tagged her entire driveway. It was declared unsafe and condemned. The cost to tear it out, regrade the entire slope with proper retaining structures, and pour a new, code-compliant driveway was astronomical. And since her actions had directly caused the failure and the extension was illegal in the first place, her insurance denied the claim. The financial burden was entirely hers. The social fallout was just as brutal. She was a pariah. The special assessment the HOA had to levy to pay for the insurance deductible and the initial engineering reports made her a villain in the eyes of every single homeowner. People she had once dominated with pink notices now crossed the street to avoid her. Her little clique of supporters vanished overnight. Within 6 months, a for sale sign went up in her yard. It stayed there for a long time. The mandated disclosure of the condemned driveway and the ongoing slope stability issues made the house nearly impossible to sell. They eventually sold it at a massive loss to a developer who planned to tear it down. The community began to heal. The new board with Sarah as president was a model of reason and transparency. They went through the CC&Rs and eliminated the vague, subjective rules Carol had used as weapons. The neighborhood started to feel like a neighborhood again, not a fiefdom. Mr. Henderson's garden gnomes returned to their posts among his roses. The Millers painted their front door a cheerful shade of blue. People started talking to each other, hosting barbecues. I was even invited. I went. I found that I quite enjoyed it. The peace and quiet I valued so much had been disturbed, not by my neighbors, but by the imposition of unjust order. With that order removed, a genuine, more pleasant peace took its place. Today, about a year after the last of the legal papers were signed, I sat on my patio, a cup of coffee in my hand, Or, it was a Tuesday morning in October, much like the one that had started it all. The air had that same crisp edge. The new wall is a thing of beauty. It's built with the same split-face granite, but the footing is deeper, the drainage system more robust. It's not just a wall, it's a statement. It is a quiet monument to the idea that facts are stubborn things. I thought about the nature of it all. Carol believed that ownership and authority were a performance. If you acted like you were in charge, if your voice was loud enough and your certainty absolute, then you were. She believed rules were things you imposed on others, tools to reinforce your own status. She had no idea that true ownership isn't about performance, it's about paper. It's about deeds, permits, surveys, and easements filed away in a dusty county records office. About the quiet, unglamorous, and unyielding power of documentation. She brought a sledgehammer and her righteous fury to a fight. I brought a file folder and a lifetime of professional patience. The outcome was never really in doubt. It was predetermined by the physics of the soil and the ink on the paper. Later that afternoon, I took the manila folder, now thick with legal documents, settlement agreements, and police reports, and placed it inside a new, clean file box. I labeled it Peterson. CHOA, dispute, closed. I carried the box down to the basement and placed it on a shelf with the archived records from my old engineering firm. Its job was done. The order it represented had been restored. I came back upstairs, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't glance out the window to check on the wall. I didn't need to. It was there. It was solid. It was right where it was supposed to be, holding everything up. And the quiet was perfect. It was a quiet I had earned.